Let's get one thing straight. The Wild West you know from the movies is a complete lie. It wasn't a land of noble heroes and dramatic showdowns at high noon. It was a filthy, brutal, and often ridiculous place where your biggest threat wasn't a gunslinger, but a simple infection from a toothache. Get ready for 30 facts that will replace the Hollywood fantasy with something far more interesting. 1. Long before Instagram influencers existed, the Wild West's fashion trends were dictated by cheap paperback thrillers called dime novels. These books transformed real outlaws into legends, making their specific style of hats and boots the must-have items of the era. Essentially, the authentic cowboy look was a marketing gimmick from the very beginning. 2. The most formidable lawbringer in the West might not have been a man. Mary Fields, a former slave known as Stagecoach Mary, became the first female sheriff in the U.S. She was famous for her twin firearms, her unshakable toughness, and a personality that could reportedly outdrink, outshoot, and outcuss any man who dared to cross her. 3. The weather in the Wild West wasn't just unpredictable, it seemed to have a personal vendetta against everyone. Cowboys on a cattle drive could face a blistering heat wave, a flash flood, and a sudden blizzard all in the same week. They didn't have weather forecasts, just the sinking feeling that the sky was actively trying to kill them. 4. Cowboy fashion was less about looking good and more about surviving the day. Every piece of gear was born from brutal practicality. Leather chaps weren't a style choice, they were armor against thorny brush that would rip your legs to shreds. And those pointed boots? They were designed for stabbing your foot into a stirrup, not for a night out dancing. 5. Stuck in the middle of nowhere with only cows for company, a cowboy's sanity often depended on a small harmonica. With no saloons or jukeboxes for hundreds of miles, this was the only source of entertainment. The quality of the music was likely terrible, but it was better than the sound of crushing, soul-destroying silence. 6. For isolated settlers, the mail-order catalog was a portal to civilization itself, a promise that things like furniture and proper tools actually existed. You could order a grand piano if you wanted. The only catch was delivery meant waiting months for a wagon that might get lost, robbed, or just give up halfway there. 7. Let's be brutally honest. Your favorite rugged cowboy hero from the movies smelled absolutely terrible. Water was a precious resource strictly for drinking, meaning baths were a rare, celebratory event. Most cowboys went weeks, if not months, between washes. Keep that in mind next time you're watching a romantic western. 8. Despite what Hollywood shows us, robbing a stagecoach was a terrible career choice. Wells Fargo's own records show that over 90% of these robberies failed, making it a high-risk, low-reward venture. Most would-be outlaws ended up with nothing more than a bad reputation and a posse on their tail. 9. The single greatest enemy in the Wild West wasn't an outlaw or a rattlesnake. It was the environment itself. The sun would bake the landscape into a solid brick, while the dust was so thick and constant that it was practically a food group. A damp bandana was the equivalent of trying to fight a forest fire with a squirt gun. A pathetic, futile gesture against an ever-present misery. 10. Cattle rustling wasn't always a high-stakes crime. Sometimes it was just a clever form of employee embezzlement. Instead of robbing a whole herd, a ranch hand might subtly add his own brand to a few of the boss's calves. It was considered less of a crime and more of an unofficial performance bonus. 11. The general store was the chaotic heart of any western town, a place where you could buy a sack of beans, a wedding dress, and a case of dynamite all in one go. This hazardous inventory meant the general store was the perfect place to stock up for dinner or to permanently solve a dispute with your neighbor. 12. You know you're truly exhausted when a hard, sweat-crusted piece of leather feels like a luxury pillow. For cowboys on the trail, their own saddle was their bed for the night. After an 18-hour workday, they were so tired they could probably sleep on a pile of rocks, and often, they practically did. 13. The iconic image of the stoic, unbreakable cowboy is largely a carefully constructed myth. In reality, the crushing loneliness and isolation of spending months on the trail with only cattle for conversation led to widespread depression. It was a silent mental health crisis hidden behind a tough-as-nails facade. 14. The legendary era of the free-roaming cowboy wasn't ended by a climactic gunfight. It was brought down by a simple, viciously effective invention: barbed wire. Once ranchers could fence off thousands of acres, the open range died, and the great cattle drives became a thing of the past, killed by 1,000 tiny spikes. 15. Think your property is big? Some ranches in the West were so vast they were basically their own countries. The XIT Ranch in Texas, for example, spanned over 3 million acres, making it larger than the entire state of Connecticut. You could get lost on your own land and not be found for a month. 16. In the desolate West, the definition of a house pet got a little weird. Pioneers would keep raccoons, prairie dogs, or for the truly adventurous, an actual bear cub. It seems that when your nearest neighbor is 100 miles away, the idea of raising a wild animal that will eventually see you as a light snack starts to sound perfectly rational. 17. In the claustrophobic mining tunnels, the most sophisticated piece of safety equipment was a canary in a cage. This tiny bird served as a cheerful, feathered, and completely disposable gas detector. Its job was to sing its heart out. The moment the music stopped, you knew the canary had just died, giving you a very brief window to run for your life. 18. Calamity. Jane was the ultimate multitasker of the frontier. One day she was known for being a hard-drinking sharpshooter who could outcuss any man in the saloon. The next, she was the only person with the guts to act as a nurse for an entire town during a deadly smallpox epidemic. She was equally capable of ending your life or saving it, depending on the day. 19. The original buffalo herds weren't just big, they were a geological event. Pioneers described them as a sea of fur, a thundering river of life that could take days to pass a single spot. So, in a spectacular display of human overachievement, these herds of millions were hunted down to just a few hundred survivors by the 1880s. 20. When he wasn't America's most wanted domestic terrorist, Jesse James was living the quiet life of a doting family man. Between train robberies and bank heists, he was just a simple farmer who loved his wife and kids. It proves that even a psychopathic outlaw can have a surprisingly solid work-life balance. 21. While gold-obsessed prospectors were chasing a shiny fantasy, the truly smart money was on salt. In a world without refrigeration, salt was the unglamorous but essential mineral that stopped food from rotting and society from collapsing. Gold made you rich, but salt was what kept you from dying of food poisoning. 22. The Hollywood image of the singing cowboy is a complete fabrication that real cowboys would have found infuriating. After 18 hours of eating dust and smelling cattle, the absolute last thing a man wanted was to listen to some guys off-key, crooning by the campfire. That kind of behavior would get you assigned to night watch for a month. 23. The legendary cow towns weren't built as communities. They were temporary pop-up traps designed to bleed cowboys dry. For a few frantic months a year, places like Dodge City would explode into a chaotic hellscape of saloons and gambling dens. Once the last cattle drive was over and the cowboys were broke, these towns would become virtual ghost towns overnight. 24. Don't assume the Wild West was lawless. It just had incredibly specific laws. In Deadwood, it was illegal to ride a horse faster than a trot within city limits. This wasn't a traffic law for safety. It was to prevent drunk cowboys from stampeding through town and spilling the sheriff's afternoon whiskey. 25. After the great buffalo herds were slaughtered, a morbid new industry emerged: bone picking. The prairies were littered with millions of skeletons, and so-called bone pickers would gather them into enormous piles near railroad towns. These literal mountains of skulls and bones would then be shipped east to be ground into fertilizer and charcoal. A truly apocalyptic final chapter for the bison. 26. On a cattle drive, the trail boss might have had the title, but the cook, or cookie, held all the real power. This culinary dictator could turn the next 3 months into heaven or hell with the quality of his coffee alone. An unhappy cook meant misery for all, making him the most feared and respected man on the trail. 27. Billy the Kid's reputation for killing 21 men was basically 19th century clickbait, a myth created by dime novelists to sell lurid paperbacks. The historical reality is that he was a hot-headed teenager who likely killed 4 men, usually because they were actively trying to kill him first. The legend was just much better for business. 28. Gambling in a Wild West saloon was less about luck and more about the art of cheating without getting caught. Hiding an ace in your boot was standard practice, but a clumsy execution of the trick had serious consequences. The penalty for being caught wasn't getting thrown out. It was a complimentary one-way trip to the local cemetery. 29. The U.S. Army marched west fully expecting to fight technologically inferior tribes. What they found instead were groups like the Comanche, who had mastered horses and firearms with terrifying speed. They delivered a masterclass in guerrilla warfare, often outfighting the very soldiers who were supposed to be civilizing them. 30. The horsemanship of a Comanche warrior would make the best Hollywood stuntman look like a child on a tricycle. They could ride at a full gallop while hanging completely off the side of their horse, using the animal as a shield while firing arrows with pinpoint accuracy from under its neck. They weren't just riding horses, they were a single, lethal entity. All right, let's be honest. For all the talk of freedom and adventure, the Wild West was mostly about trying not to die from boredom or a splinter. So here's a simple question for the comments. What's the one thing from this list that would have made you tap out immediately? The smell? The food? The saddle pillow? Let me know the exact moment you would have given up. And after you admit your weakness, hit the like button and subscribe.